The video which you are about to see is an account of the rankings of the film franchise known as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I have compiled my list by viewing the mad and macabre in all 8 films. The events of the viewings helped me decide the rankings of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Hey, what's up YouTubers, and welcome back to another Toddy Walnuts video. And as you can see from the title, I'm going to be going through the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise and ranking them from worst to first. There are a total of 8 movies in the franchise so far. And before I get into my picks, and these are just all my opinion, keep that in mind, I just wanted to give you a little rundown about the history of the franchise, and starting with the writer and director Tobe Hooper. He made his first movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in 1974. It was co-written and produced by Kim Henkel, and those two guys had a lot of work together. They did a lot of collaboration, a lot of writing together. And Tobe Hooper produced the first movie for $140,000 with a cast of unknown actors, mostly from the central Texas area, and that's where the film was shot. And right from the beginning, the film had difficulties with the ratings from the Motion Picture Association of America. The MPAA deemed it to be too violent, so they slapped an X rating on it, which was devastating to Tobe Hooper because he knew he wouldn't be able to distribute the movie and get it seen in theaters with that rating. It would be a lot of problems for him. So eventually they did get it down to NC-17, and Tobe Hooper wanted an R rating, but he had to settle for the NC-17. And at that time it was banned in several countries, and even in the US many theaters refused to show it due to the violence that was depicted in the films. But it has since gained cult status as one of the greatest horror films in history. It has spawned 7 sequels and prequels, and it also has been very good commercially as far as producing action figures from the characters in the films, video games, comic books, merchandise, t-shirts, all that kind of stuff, posters. So I'm going to get into my list here now, starting with number 8. And this is Texas Chainsaw from 2013. Okay, Texas Chainsaw 2013, where do we start? This is a train wreck of a movie, in my opinion. It is by far the worst in the franchise. That's why it's standing here at number 8. It was directed by John Loysenhop. Dan Yeager played Leatherface, who was 6'6" Leatherface. He's the tallest in the franchise. I didn't really think he played a great Leatherface. The mask looked really bad. It looked like it was bought at like a Halloween store. The movie started out really, really good though, with cameos by Bill Moseley, Gunnar Hansen, and John Dugan. And Marilyn Burns even makes a cameo in here in the beginning. And it started out so good, and it just went downhill from there. I thought the actors were pretty bad, which usually in these horror movies, they're pretty bad anyway, but these actors were stiff, and none of them were really likable. In some of these horror movies, there's some guys that you hate, and you hope they get killed right away, but there's some that you kind of cling to, and you hope they make it through, and you're kind of pulling for them. To me, at no point in this movie were you pulling for any of the characters. They were just kind of blah. The story was pretty poor. I will say a couple good things about the movie, though. There were some pretty cool kills. I did like the layout of the house with the different hidden rooms and hidden passages going to the basement. Scott Eastwood was in the movie. That's a plus, although he didn't have a very good role. He played a police officer, and his role was very small. He didn't have too many lines. And I know Scott Eastwood seems to like the action movies. I would like to see him maybe, take a step into his father's shoes and do some westerns. I realize those are big shoes to fill, but I think Scott Eastwood has that look. He looks a lot like a young Clint Eastwood. And I would not mind seeing Clint and Scott get together for a movie before Clint wraps it up. But yeah, there was a line in this movie that just made me shudder. It's when the young lady kicks the chainsaw over to Leatherface and says, "Do your thing, cuz." I mean, I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. The only thing that would have made that scene more ridiculous is if they would have fist bumped and did a bro hug and then started throwing up gang signs, because that's how ridiculous that was to me. It was something from Saturday Night Live. It just didn't seem like it was part of a Leatherface movie. To me, Leatherface is this hulking, mindless, brutal murderer. He doesn't have a conscience. He doesn't have charisma or to the point where he has affections for people or things. He's a protector. He protects his farmhouse. He protects his chainsaw, and he protects his family that raised him. He doesn't know kids on the street as cuz and stuff like that. That really bothered me. This is only the second time I've seen this movie. I watched it when it first came out. I did not like it. I went back to check my IMDb score, because I usually score my movies as soon as I watch them. And I did give this a 4 out of 10, which I think I was being a little bit generous on that. But I'm going to stick with 4 out of 10, just because there was some pretty cool things in there, but a lot of bad things. But that was number 8, and here we'll move on to number 7. Number 7 on my list is Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, starring Matthew McConaughey and Renée Zellweger. It's a film that was directed by Kim Henkel in 1995, and it was shelved by Columbia Pictures. They did not like the movie. It was almost completely scrapped until McConaughey and Zellweger became stars over the next couple years. Zellweger had a breakout role in Jerry Maguire, and McConaughey had a breakout role in Contact, and they were officially big-time Hollywood stars now. So in 1997, Columbia Pictures released this movie. It was originally going to be called The Return of the Chainsaw Massacre, but they cut it and they changed the title to what you see now, The Next Generation. It had cameos by John Dugan, who was a cop in the movie, Paul Partain, who played Franklin in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He was now an orderly in this film. And Marilyn Burns, who played Sally Hardesty. She was the patient on the gurney at the end who made eye contact with the camera at the very end. It's fascinating to know that there was 0 chainsaw deaths in this movie. It's the only movie in the franchise that does not have a chainsaw death scene. It also had a very bizarre twist plot with the government and Illuminati at the end, which I did not really care for. Robert Jacks was Leatherface in this one. He did an okay job. It was so-so. Also fascinating to know that Zellweger and McConaughey first acted together in the movie Dazed and Confused. So other than that, there's really not a lot to say about this movie. It was dull. I watched it a couple times. I'll probably pick up the Scream Factory edition at some point if it's cheap enough and get the slipcover with it. But this is not a movie that's very high on my list, and it's definitely number 7, in my opinion, in the franchise for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Number 6 on my list is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: Leatherface from 2017. This is a movie that was directed by Alexandra Bustillo and Julian Maury. And it's a coming-of-age type story about a young Leatherface who they call Jedediah Sawyer in this movie. That's one of the things that is a little bit inconsistent about the franchise. There's always different names and different places where he lived, different houses. So, but this one, he was Jedediah Sawyer, and it shows how he came up through the juvenile detention system and how he escaped and how he became a brutal killer. I didn't really think this installment was necessary to the franchise. I don't think we really need to know the background of Leatherface, especially in this kind of coming of age story. Still, it was beautifully shot. They filmed it in Bulgaria. And Stephen Dorff, who played Officer Hartman, gave a great performance. I thought he was really good in the movie. There was a really cool diner scene. I'm not going to give it away for those who haven't watched this, but the diner scene was pretty cool. And there was a curb stomp scene I thought was pretty cool. And it had a pretty high body count. There was 22 different deaths in this movie. So it was pretty violent. And a little side note, little piece of trivia, that this was Tobe Hooper's final film as a producer because he passed away in August of 2017. So all in all, I would give this film a 4.5 out of 10. I watched it twice. I may never watch it again. So on to the next one. Number 5 on my list is Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, which is the third installment in the franchise. It was directed by Jeff Burr, and Leatherface was played by R.A. Mihailoff. Gunnar Hansen was almost going to be Leatherface in this film, but at the last minute they couldn't agree on a contract, so therefore Mihailoff became Leatherface, and he did a great job in this movie. It was originally rated X, and they had to make a few cuts to get it down to NC-17. Ken Foree played a great role in here as Benny, kind of a survivalist. I thought he had a great role. I really enjoyed that. The original script was much more violent, and that's why they had to cut it. Otherwise, it would have been X-rated. It was much gorier. I would have loved to have seen the uncut edition of that. Maybe it's out there somewhere, and maybe sometime we can see that. Funny little side note about the director, Jeff Burr. He was fired shortly after the start of production, but he was rehired because they couldn't find a replacement. And they even asked Tom Savini and Peter Jackson if they wanted to do it, and they both turned it down. Jeff Burr wanted to film with 16mm film in Texas like the original film was from 1974, but New Line rejected his idea. I think that was part of the reason why there was some headbutting going on. Tobe Hooper wanted to be more involved in this production, but he was filming Spontaneous Combustion in 1990 at the same time this film was being made, so he couldn't be more part of the production that he wanted to be, though. And New Line Cinema purchased the rights to the franchise of Texas Chainsaw Massacre because they wanted to compete with the Nightmare on Elm Street series. And they even kind of made a little wink and a nod to that series by Leatherface making his mask in the beginning of the film in his little shed out back by the swamp. And that was homage to Freddy when he was making his glove in the 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street. It was kind of like a wink and a nod to him for that. There was a cameo by Caroline Williams, who played Stretch from Part 2. She was a news reporter in this movie. And that's about all I have to say about this. I really enjoyed it. It was refreshing to kind of get back to the original, because Part 1 was so gritty and horrifying, and then Part 2 was more comical, and then getting back to Part 3, getting back to the roots, it was a fun watch. So on to the next one. Number 4 on my list is a childhood favorite of mine. I used to watch this many times on VHS at the corner store, ride my bike up there and grab a handful of VHS. I always pick this one out. I know this movie verbatim. I can quote line for line on these movies here. But it recently dropped on my list a little bit, and that's why it's number 4. A couple have surpassed it recently, at least for the time being. At any given time, any of these movies can switch. So for today, this is number 4, and this is Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. This movie was so fun. It had great characters. It had funny kills. It was a horror comedy. There was a lot of good one-liners. Bill Moseley as Chop Top and Dennis Hopper as Lefty stole the show. Lefty was the uncle of Sally and Franklin from the first movie, and he's kind of going back, getting some revenge, if you will, trying to find out what's going on. Why are all these murders happening, and how can he stop it, and how can he kind of take revenge on his family? Bill Johnson was Leatherface, and he killed it. He did a great job. Caroline Williams was Stretch, the DJ. She was the one that heard the brutal killings on the air, and then she recorded it on a tape. So much goodness in this movie. I really love the movie. Dennis Hopper, though, funnily enough, said that he doesn't know if this is his worst movie ever or Super Mario Brothers from 1993. He really looked down on this movie. He did not care much for it, but I tell you, without him in the movie, it would have suffered, because he really added a lot to this movie. And I think that's about all. I give this an 8 out of 10. I'll do a recap at the end and give up my grades again, because I think I forgot to grade some of these. But this is TCM 2 from 1986. It was directed by Tobe Hooper. I think I said that already. And one more thing I forgot to add that I found that was interesting. Bill Moseley, who played Chop Top, he ad-libbed most, if not all, of his dialogue. And he says that to this day, Chop Top is the favorite character that he ever played. And I believe it, because he had a lot of fun doing it. And I had a lot of fun watching him do that. And so I really love this movie. And at times, this was number 2 on my list, but it bumped down to 4. It may be back to 2 again at some point. We'll see. On to the next one. Number 3 on my list is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning from 2006, directed by Jonathan Liebesman and written by Sheldon Turner. The movie takes place in July of 1969, and a car full of kids are driving through Texas. 2 brothers are going to enlist in the military. One is going to re-enlist. The other younger brother is going to enlist for the first time, or so he says. He plans on fleeing to Mexico. Leatherface was played by Andrew Bryanarski, who stands 6 foot 5 inches tall and weighs 300 pounds. The movie has a great role by Arlie Ermy, who plays Charles Hewitt and the sheriff of the town. It originally got a NC-17 rating. They had to cut 17 scenes to make it R-rated. There's an excellent 45-minute documentary on this DVD. I really recommend it. There is 11 kills total in this film. And it kind of goes over the backstory of Arlie Ermy's character, Sheriff Hewitt, and how he became sheriff, and some of the backstory of the townsfolk and all that. I really recommend this movie. I give it a 7 out of 10, and it has a high rewatchability factor to it. So that's number 3 on my list. I give it a 7 out of 10. Coming in at number 2 is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003, directed by Marcus Nispel, and Leatherface is played by Andrew Bryanarski again, who is Jedediah Sawyer in this particular movie. It stars the lovely Jessica Biel, who plays Erin, who looks fantastic in this movie with her cowboy hat and her little white tank top. She looked really, really good. Also starring her boyfriend in the film, Eric Balfour, who plays Kemper. He played a really good role. Arlie Ermy plays Sheriff Hoyt. He probably stole the show, in my opinion. John LaRoquette reprises his role as the narrator. He also narrated the very beginning of the original 1974 movie, so it was cool to see him come back. In this movie, they reveal Leatherface's real face for the only time in the franchise, and they say that he had a skin disease which caused him to wear the skin masks over his diseased face. In order for Andrew Bryanarski to become a little bit bigger, I thought this was pretty interesting. He said he ate nothing but brisket and white bread till he reached 300 pounds, and he's a big boy. He's 6'5", so he played a really menacing role as Leatherface. They asked Gunnar Hansen, the original Leatherface, if he wanted to make a cameo as the truck driver at the very end of the film, but he declined. I thought it was interesting that they also asked Dolph Lundgren to play Leatherface, but he turned it down. That would have been kind of weird to see. They also auditioned, or they wanted to audition, Kirsten Dunst, Katie Holmes, and Jessica Alba to play the role of Erin. It would have been interesting to see those three ladies play the role. I think they would have done a great job as well. And I thought it was interesting to read that film critic Roger Ebert gave this movie 0 stars, which I think that's pretty crazy. I think this is a really good movie. I give it a 7.5 out of 10, and I recommend it. It has a high rewatchability factor to it. And coming in at the #1 spot, should be no surprise to anybody who watches my channel even a little bit. This is my favorite horror film of all time. This is the original, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, directed by the late, great Tobe Hooper. And Leatherface was played by the late, great Gunnar Hansen, who stood a 6'4" menacing figure, perfect for the role of Leatherface. And he originally turned the role down because he thought the script was too brutal. But I'm glad that he changed his mind, because I couldn't see anybody else playing the original Leatherface. He did a great job. This was filmed in 4 weeks on a $60,000 budget. And in my opinion, it's a masterpiece for not only low-budget films, but films in history. Hooper allowed Gunnar Hansen to make Leatherface his own with the grunts and the movements that he made, and he really did a great job with that. Tobe Hooper originally wanted this film to be rated PG, believe it or not, but the MPAA gave it an X rating, and they had to cut several scenes to make it even R-rated. And the filming took 4 weeks. Gunnar Hansen only had one shirt for the 4 weeks, and of course, in the 100-degree heat in Texas and all the movement and the sweat, his shirt was pretty rancid. And by the end of the movie, some of the cast and crew said that they were becoming physically ill just from the smell of him. And in particular, the dinner scene towards the end, when everybody was in the room together, it was 100 degrees outside and people were becoming physically ill. Some of them had to stop and go outside and vomit. But this is a great movie. I give it an 8 out of 10. I really recommend it, of course, and this will always be my favorite horror film. So that was my ranking for the franchise from 8 to 1. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Comment below, let me know how you would rank these movies. And stay tuned, because during the next week or so, I will be uploading a video to show my Texas Chainsaw Massacre collection. I do have some new items that I did add to the collection, so I look forward to sharing that with you guys. Thanks again for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.